Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One is an expert with years of experience giving free advice. The other owns his own microphone and can do the odd bit of editing. Here are your hosts, Damien Fahy and Andy Leeks.
Now, Damien, before we get on with this week's podcast, you had something quickly to say about our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got a new sponsor, Money Farm, and Money Farm are an online investment advisor and one of the biggest digital wealth management companies in Europe. So a big thank you to them for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Money Farm create portfolios to maximise long-term returns using ETFs to make incredibly cheap portfolios. And you even get the first £10,000 of your portfolio invested without any charge from Money Farm. And if you enter the code MTTM20K into the box when you sign up, you get the first £20,000 of your portfolio invested and run by moneyfarm.com without any charge.
Great stuff. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 97 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fahy, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How you doing?
Good, Andy. Good as ever. It's great to see your smiling face. Actually, today's been quite an exciting day in the world of finance. So I'm really enthused about this week's podcast because we've got quite a bit to cover and some of it very topical. I think you can guess what I'm talking about.
I think I can. Yeah, there was some big news today. I'll let you do the big news.
Well, yeah. Obviously, as people probably know, the Bank of England dropped their bomb and cut rates. It did various things this week on Thursday, in fact. And I'm going to run through what it means to people and talk a bit more, give a bit more meat to the bones, because you see these headlines and actually sometimes the bit that's underneath the headline and it's not really talked about is actually more interesting. So that's the first snippet of what's going to be in this podcast. And so that's quite exciting. I think the news and media have been building up to Super Thursday, and today is Thursday for people who listen to the podcast, so hence why I'm saying today.
Good, exciting stuff. It's nice to see you enthused about finance. You're always enthused about finance, but today you look particularly so. And before we go too far into the money stuff, have you been up to much this week? What's been going on in the life of the Fahy?
Well, the Fahy is the usual. We had a 21st birthday party for my niece. That shows you how old I am.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. When you say your niece and she's 21, and not a lot from my side, but next week I am going away for a week with the family. Nothing exciting, just in the UK, spending time with family and in-laws and things like that. But so
your in-laws will be delighted with that. You really sold it to them.
I didn't mean it like that, but so I'm spending
nothing
a week.
Excited, just spending time with the in-laws. In fact, it's going to probably drag.
Yeah, I know that sounded terrible, but no, I'm not going to backtrack. I've done it now,
and it's staying in the edit as well.
So if I'm still around and have survived the week, then we will be back in a week and a bit's time. So there won't be a podcast next week. That's why I'm mentioning. I probably shouldn't have done, but that's why I'm mentioning what I'm doing next week, because we are going to miss a week of podcasting, so I can spend some time with my own family for a change, rather than the world of money. What about you, Andy? Anyway, let's just change the topic before I dig myself into an ever deeper hole. How was your week? Up to anything interesting?
Well, nothing too exciting in my week, Damien, but my wife, who's a childminder, she's had the dreaded call from Ofsted, so we've been deep in Ofsted land, getting prepared and sort of going through that process, and luckily all was good with that. So
that's a stressful time, Andy.
It is.
Yeah, I remember. I know only too well with friends who are teachers, various stages in sort of school, from young right way up into older children, and when Ofsted come, it's incredibly stressful, and you know to leave them well alone, because they're going to be going through hell for a week or so, however long it takes for Ofsted to turn up.
That's it. It made me laugh actually, because my wife was relaying the story. 24 hours of absolute sort of panic and mayhem. Like I say, all was good in the end. But when the Ofsted inspector arrived, the door was opened, and my youngest daughter And she is genuinely like this. She is just very welcoming and, happy. But it was almost like it had been overly rehearsed, and my wife was slightly worried about it because as my wife opened the door, my youngest daughter said, "Hello, my name is Sophie. How are you?" And I just thought, oh, that wasn't rehearsed, I promise.
Oh well, at least she's very polite, Andy, and yeah, I think that the Ofsted inspector probably was quite impressed. They probably have it all the time, but probably not quite as polite as little Sophie.
Yeah, she got through it in the end. Right, yeah, should we do the money stuff?
Let's crack on with the money stuff because we got a lot to get through as ever. I've crammed it full, so I've already told you about the Bank of England and the rate cut and what it means to you. But I also want to talk about something called the 50-30-20 rule. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a rule that's been getting a rather lot of airtime and sort of column inches of late to do with finance and budgeting. So I want to talk about that. It's a rule in which you could try and live your money life by. And then, as promised last week, I'm going to touch upon apps, games for ways of teaching your children about investing.
Good. Okay, well, should we deal with the elephant in the room?
Let's deal with the elephant in the room, the interest rate cut. So, what happened today? Mark Carney, the Governor of Bank of England, he effectively, very well, simply, I'll list what he did. He announced that they were going to cut the bank base rate, so that's the Bank of England's rate that's set, and pretty much everything else in the market is priced off, and so are a lot of mortgages directly. Cut that rate from 0.5% to 0.25%.
I've seen it sort of mentioned in the press that it's been slashed to 0.25, and I thought to myself, that's a little heavy-handed, but actually, cutting from 0.5 to 0.25, it is a 50% cut, isn't it? So it is a slash.
Well, do you know what, Andy? You're spot on, because somebody was saying a similar thing about slashing, and then if you talk about relatively, the rate itself has been effectively slashed, even though it doesn't really make a lot of difference to anyone. Now, this is the what I want to really talk about, because people are hearing the headlines and they think, oh, is that good, bad, or is it indifferent to me? Does it make no difference at all? So, first off, what does it mean to mortgage borrowers? And I just want to highlight that the average mortgage is probably now going to see £22 a month come off of their monthly mortgage repayments. And that is going to be impact about 1.5 million mortgages out there, which isn't actually very many.
No.
And the reason for that is because in recent years, 80% of new mortgages that are sold are actually fixed rates. So, where people will buy a mortgage and they'll fix their rate for a couple of years so they know what they're going to pay. And it doesn't matter what the Bank of England's base rate does. They know what they're going to pay. And then after that period, they come off and either go and remortgage or go onto their lender's standard variable rate, which then often has a tie with the Bank of England base rate. So that's why so few mortgages will be impacted. On the existing ones, so the ones that have been around for years and years and years, about half of those are fixed. So you can already see there's hardly, in the scheme of things, the majority of mortgages aren't actually going to have any immediate impact from this rate cut. And even the ones that are variable rates, a lot of them aren't directly linked to the Bank of England base rate. So if that moves down like it has done from 0.5 to 0.25, their mortgage won't automatically fall as a result, because the variable rate of a mortgage lender, a lot of them, it's actually down to the lender's discretion as to where they move those mortgage rates. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they don't have to pass the cut on. So by the time you guys are listening to this podcast, you will probably have heard about a whole number of lenders either making statements saying that they have passed on the cut to their borrowers on variable rates, or are not. So the people who don't are going to obviously get a bit of bad press, and especially as Mark Carney himself in his press conference after the announcement went to great pains to say that the mortgage lenders are going to there's going to be pressure on them to pass on the saving, because don't forget, Mark Carney really wants you all to go out and spend that extra £22 a month that you're going to have in the economy, because if we all do that, then the economy should in theory have a little bit of a pickup. So that's what it means to mortgage borrowers. What about savers? Now, savers have had a bad time. I don't mean to laugh, but it's almost, you've got to laugh or cry, haven't you? If you're a saver, and there's plenty of people out there who listen to this podcast who have money in banks and building societies. You've been getting 2/5 of nothing, basically, since the financial crisis and since they cut rates back in 2009. Well, the news is it's not getting any better, because with the rate cut, you're going to now get £25 less interest a year for a £10,000 deposit. Now, that means typically going forward, a £10,000 easy access account will only generate about £40 interest in a year. It's barely worth having, but it's better marginally than a kick in the teeth. So savers, you're still getting hammered. That is the whole point of this. As I said last week when I mentioned this topic, the whole point is they want you to get hammered.
Ironically, if savers actually use that money to go and get hammered, we'll all be all right in the end. Mark Carney would love that.
Well, funny, after the Bank of England made the announcement, their website went down because I don't know if it was the amount of interest, and I just made a quip on Twitter saying I think they might have just all gone down the pub and just thought, do you know what, this economy is absolutely screwed. We're off, and just pulled out all the plugs and turned the lights off. But it wasn't. Interest rate cuts weren't the only things that they announced. And before I go on to the other bits and pieces, the reason they did it is because obviously the Brexit vote means that the UK economy is looking a bit sluggish. It's taken a bit of a hit based on the forecasts and economic data they've been able to get since then. We've only been a month in, so we haven't got the thing with economic data is always backward looking, so you don't find out what really happened until months after the actual event. But just to put this into context, they were talking about that the economic growth this year would be 2%. So the economy would grow by 2% this year. They think that will still be the same, but going forward they'll think it drop off. So by 2018, where they would have said the annual rate of growth was 2.3%, it's going to drop down to 1.8. That doesn't sound like a big difference, but it is. Again, going back to your thing of percentage differences. And also they think unemployment's going to pick up, whereas now it's just under 5%. They think it will start to creep up in the next few years to 5.6%. Now that extra 0.5% that we're going to have, again, doesn't sound a lot, but when you apply that to millions of people, you can see that that's actually a decent number. Rather than people be too doom and gloom about the whole thing, I'd just like to put some context on that 5.6%, because a few years ago, probably not even that long ago, Mark Carney actually was targeting the 7% unemployment rate as the point at which he probably might start raising interest rates, that the economy was getting back to where it should be after the financial crisis. So even if in 2019, when they're now predicting the 5.6% unemployment rate, that is still fairly low by if you judge by what we were expecting, say 3 years ago. Anyway, all of this stuff is very. If you look at the charts that they produce with these reports, they do like a fan chart. I don't know if you know what a fan chart is, Andy, but it's like a line graph, and then at the end where they get to the point where you're into the future, it fans out this line, and they give you a range of spreads. Well, the range is so incredible that it pretty much goes from boom to bust in terms of the economy. It's pretty pointless diagram when you look at it, because they just don't know. So the upshot is that the Bank of England think the economy is going to struggle, so they've done this measure. What else have they done? I'll quickly talk through these points. Do you remember our old friend QE, quantitative easing, money printing, Andy?
Yes, water in the garden.
Water in the garden. Go back and listen to that podcast. But yes,
it's stuck with me, Damien. It's stuck with me.
They've watered the garden. What they've done, they've announced they're going to buy an extra £60 billion of UK government debt and £10 billion worth of corporate debt. Now, don't worry about the nuances of that. What that effectively means is that they're going to print £70 billion of money that is going to work its way into the economy. They can't, or they won't, print 70 billion and just go up in a helicopter and do helicopter money and drop it out to the economy. You laugh, but that's a phrase that's used in economics.
The government version of my grandpa turning up on a Friday and doing scramble. Do you know what that is? Like taking a handful of coins and throwing them, and all the children go and grab them. That was my youth.
Your granddad used to do that.
Bless my grandpa, on a Friday evening he used to come round and do a Friday scramble, it was called, yeah.
See, your granddad was a precursor to the policymakers at the Bank of England, because that's effectively what they're doing, but they don't want to just chuck money in the air. They do it by buying printing, making fictional money electronically and buying assets that banks and pension funds or whatever, they're out there. And so therefore they become awash with cash, and it starts to hopefully feed its way through the economy by banks lending. You get cheaper loans and stuff where interest rates fall and you go out spending. That's the idea. So to put that into context, 70 billion, that sounds like a lot. After the financial crisis, between 2009 and 2012, they did 375 billion pounds worth of QE. So you can see that they're obviously worried. They haven't done the same amount, but we're not in a financial crisis. But it shows you the context, that how concerned they are. Now, if you add on to that, there was another scheme that was announced called the Term Funding Scheme, where you're going to start hearing this acronym TFS that's going to be bandied around. And basically, there's £100 billion in that, and that is a scheme whereby they're going to allow banks to borrow from the Bank of England at really, really cheap rates, almost at the base rate, because they can't normally. So therefore, to encourage them to then borrow that money and then they go and lend it out into the economy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But what's different, there was a funding for lending scheme. You may remember the term a few years ago that they created, which was doing the same sort of thing. And what happened, it just drove down savings rates because banks borrowed the money, didn't actually really lend it out at all. And it just meant that interest rates generally went down for savers. But this time, what is different, and it's not really been picked up much by the press, is that 100 billion is actually being printed out of thin air. So it's another version of QE. So it's another version of just basically making fictitious money. So if you add that to the previous amount I was saying, really, what we've had is a 0.25% base rate cut and 170 billion pounds worth of money printed out of thin air that's going to hopefully hit the economy. And that's quite incredible. I mean, that is something that is really... People at first thought that it was going to be pretty boring, this announcement, and most people probably think it still is, with only a small cut in the base rate. But with this extra measure, it really opens the door for them to do all sorts of things in terms of printing money and hopefully lifting the economy. One final thing that I would add before we move on to the next section: could the rates go even lower? The answer is yes, because they've even stated in the Bank of England minutes after this meeting that they're probably going to cut to 0% by the end of the year. Could they go negative? Who knows? It's happened, like I said, last week in Japan. We just don't know that yet. But we could see 0% by the end of the year. And just to show you what a crazy world we live in, I was looking at something earlier on, and do you know in November 1979 that the Bank of England base rate hit 17%? So how far have we come? And that's pretty much just shy of... I was born just before then. So almost in my lifetime...
Do yourself a favour. It was a long way before then.
The base rate has come from 17% to 0%. So I'm not sure that's not progress. That is just, obviously, historic average is somewhere around about 5%. But there we go, Andy. There's a whistle-stop tour of what this means to you.
It is incredible stuff. It does seem to me that lessons are perhaps being learned, and this is the first example I've seen of our sort of government actually being a bit more proactive about the whole situation rather than reactive. Would you agree with that, or is this just literally finger in the air, seeing which way the wind's blowing and just flying by the seat of their pants? What's happening?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Andy, because the central banks globally have cut interest rates. I think the total is about 627 times since the financial crisis. But this is probably one of the only instances, or one of the few instances, where they have preempted something. The actual cut came ahead of time. Because you think back to the financial crisis, what happened? Interest rates were cut, and we had QE and all that sort of thing after the financial crisis, and once the economy had already started to slide. So this time around, what Carney's doing is actually preempting things and trying to stop the rot before it sets in. So yeah, it is something very different, and it's in some ways it's exciting, even though the idea of sort of chucking in out the lifeboats and whatever to save the economy is something that's to be concerned about.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, watch this space, really, isn't it? I think it's a new situation for a lot of people, so we'll have to see what happens. What have we got coming up next?
Right, the next piece I'm going to do is the 50-30-20 rule, Andy.
Yeah, it sounds to me like they've nicked the 80-20 and just split the 80 down into a 50 and 30. Sounds remarkably like something you've come up with.
It's actually I was looking at where the origins of this came from, and I couldn't find it. And I think it's somewhere in the distant past and the sort of maze of American money stuff. Because in America, there's lots of, they're very big on this sort of money talk, and in particular self-help stuff. And what's happened, I don't know why it's come to the fore this week or the sort of last few weeks. I've heard people talk about the 50-30-20. I know you got it wrong. I have to keep making sure I'm adding up to 100. The 50-30.
Just think of the 5-3-2 that was made famous by Keegan back in... Oh, no, it wasn't Keegan. Who was it? Anyway, just think of the 5-3-2 formation in football.
I
and you
think
can't
of
go
that.
wrong.
And basically, it's an idea to try and help people live or construct a budget that can actually help them to live their life within their means, to actually save, put money away, and not to actually enjoy their life a bit as well. It's not too... it's actually trying to be a little bit realistic, but give some structure. Because one of the things that people struggle with is when you talk about budgeting, they're trying to work out how much should they be spending on things, or how should they designate their money. And this is an idea that I just want to run through and just chuck my 2 pennies worth at and explain to people, because some people out there might actually find some use in it. I think the idea originally was trying to be aimed at young people, so people in their sort of 20s and 30s, and which fits with the next piece we're going to do about investing anyway, but it's trying to give people a steer of how you sort your money. So the first thing is, what they were saying is, if you get your take-home pay, what you should do is split it into 3 silos, which is the 50% of your money, 30% of your money, and 20% of your money. And the 50% of your money should be designated for the essentials in life. So we're talking about food, you're talking about transport, commuting, utility bills, mortgage. That should make up 50% of your money. And the next 30% should be designated for your discretionary spending. So that can be things that you could live without, and they could be things that are actually fun stuff. So almost thinking about you going out for meals. But when you think about discretionary, they tend to include things like mobile phones, because theoretically you can survive without a mobile phone, but you couldn't survive without a mortgage or rent. So that falls into this discretionary part. The 20% is the savings element. So whether that is saving or investing, or paying down debt. So if you think of that as building for the future. So the idea is, you get your pay packet, 50% goes on essentials, that's bills effectively, 20% goes for saving for your future in some way, doesn't stipulate it has to be pensions, and 30% is the discretionary spending, which is probably a little bit more flexible, and therefore as time goes on you can move those sort of margins slightly. But the point is, you don't have to obsess about the exact bills in each category. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, isn't it? It sounds all very idealistic and all very nice, and actually very sensible when you sort of drill it down that way. But my sort of worry would be how many people out there would actually be able to say that 50% of their income could cover the whole of the mortgage, all of the shopping, all of the gas. My answer is, yeah, lovely, brilliant, but how realistic is it really?
I agree with you totally. When I looked at it, and I've heard people talking about it, and I think people get swept up with before I slate the idea, I do like it in principle. I like the idea of people are starting out. These are sort of ideals you should try to aim towards, because even if really what they're doing is promoting you being slightly sensible, so making sure you know the things you have to pay, that you can't default on or ignore, and also the idea of trying to save a bit for a rainy day, because in this world of almost seemingly infinite credit, people don't even bother to do that, and the idea that you do have a discretionary amount, and that is important too. So I like that. That gets 3 big ticks from Damien. But the element, like you said, if I apply this to my own money, I couldn't do it. And it's not because I don't want to, it's just that physically, in the world that we live, especially where I live and you live down in the south east of England, rents and mortgages, house prices are expensive. So my 50% of bills, I would love to only have 50% of my money paying the bills. And also, it doesn't allow for for changes in your lifestyle. For example, at the point where in the past when my wife was working full time, then yeah, it would have been far more realistic. But of course, there are times in life where you have, like we've had children and you make decisions of trying to bring them up in the early years and all that sort of stuff, where she reduced work and all that side of things. So I'm quite happy taking a bit of a hit on income and not meeting these criteria. So I think it's a nice idea, but it seemed to me that when I was hearing it touted around, I don't like the idea that people are being judged by this mysterious 50-30-20 rule that nobody has. I don't see the evidence for the 50-30-20, but I like the principle of you should try and have a bit of fun, discretionary spending, should try and have a bit of savings and income. I think the reality is that you should try and probably work towards it rather than actually use it as a starting point and getting too obsessed about it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting anyway. I remember that 5-3-2 formation, 50-30-20.
Yeah, but has anybody ever won anything with a 5-3-2 formation, Andy? I think the answer's probably no.
Well, the 3-5-2 became far more popular, certainly in the last 5 years, which is basically the 5-3-2, but with the... Anyway, we're going to get into technicals on football, but what that is essentially is a slightly less... Do you know what?
Basically, Andy, what you're saying is, yeah, sod your bills,
Yeah.
just go all out, expand the 30%, which is the discretionary fund spending bit.
That's right.
Just go all out for that, and you're going to enjoy life, which I wholeheartedly back. I think you're right, Andy. I think we should rewrite this and be the 30. Yeah, the numbers changing around, and we just have more fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll move on.
Move to the 3-5-2. Good. Okay, what we got next?
The final piece, I said last week that I would do. I was asked. Do you remember? I was asked in a question about is there a way of trying to introduce young people to investing?
Oh, yes.
And it's quite a tricky one actually, because it's not a natural thing for young people to do, is it? To be involved in investing, and also they're pretty much excluded from doing it, because don't forget, you can't actually invest money as a child, and I'm not saying they should necessarily be doing so, but they can't even experiment and play around with sort of small sums. But I've done some research and looked around at some of the ideas out there, and there aren't actually that many, but there are 3 apps that I want to just throw out there and people to look at, and they might be useful. One of them, this idea actually, Andy, I really like. It probably isn't quite suitable for children, but it's something called moneyboxapp.com. Now this is something I think we've been crying out for in society. Do you remember before I talked about the idea of saving the change? There's a bank account out there which I use, which can, every time you spend on a card, it rounds up the amount, and it say you spend £2.70, it rounds it up to £3 and puts the 30p in a savings account. Well, this company have created a system whereby that money, that difference, if you register a card, can actually be saved and invested into an ISA. So rather than saving into a savings account, you use your spare change to start investing, and they have 3 funds: cautious, I think it's medium, and sort of more adventurous, which you can invest in. I love the idea of it because it's very simple. It just gets people really kind of doing the pocket money type idea of doing it. Of course, children can't hold ISAs, but the principle of it I do like. So if you have somebody who's young, maybe a young adult, I quite like this idea of trying to do. Or it's even something that probably plenty of listeners would like to start to dabble into investing and not have to do too much about it, but just save some change. So I quite like that one.
Yeah, I like that one too, Damien, because ever since you mentioned it on one of the pods that we did, I signed up to the Save the Change thing through my bank, and I absolutely love it. I think it's 4 months I've been doing it now. I think there's about £140 in there. And I just...
Really?
Yeah, just over £30 a month I'm saving through that. Now, that tells me one thing. I'm obviously doing far too many transactions through my bank, but luckily a lot of them... Thing is, though, I do all of my transactions. I'm not really a cash man, so I'll buy a coffee in the morning. That'll be on card. I'll buy my train tickets on card. I'll make £1, £2 purchases on card as often as I can, because I just hate the idea of cash. So I think that's why it's really working for me, and seeing that money building up. And actually I wanted to find something like an ISA to put it in, because I realised that I haven't really got much savings for my children, and so this saving the change I did solely for my children. I want to save for my children. It's not going to be huge bucks, is it? But it's something anyway towards the children. And actually, after speaking to you, I could maybe even get them involved with it.
Yeah, do you know what, Andy? I'm so impressed you got, like, you're saying roughly about £30 a month. And as somebody who's relatively, I mean, I'm like you, I use cards, I don't tend to use cash, and I don't go around spending a lot. And even at a low level, I was ticking over £10-15 a month that was just going in there, which is, if you rolled it up over a year, I mean, that's like 120 odd quid you could use towards Christmas, which I think is a brilliant idea, because you don't even notice it. So yeah, that's a nice idea. The moneyboxapp.com, I think it's only just launching, so if you look at it you might be able to register your interest to do it, but have a look. The other two that I'm going to quickly mention are actually more games, so they are deliberately made to teach you about investing, and so children can do this. So they're apps that you can download on your phone. So the first one is called Little Trader, and it's quite, I've not played it, but it seems, I quite like the idea because it teaches you how to invest in a virtual stock market, but the theme is that it's in the 1920s, and it's one of those empire building games. So you buy and sell fictitious stocks, and you try and make a profit, and with that profit you then graduate from your basement trading facility to get offices and furniture and employ people. So it's kind of, I think, a bit of like a take on a Monopoly style, build an empire, and but with trading. So it's actually a game, and I think it's a little animated thing. So I quite like that. That's something children can do, and they could get them interested in trading. And the last one I'll just quickly mention is Best Brokers, and that one is real time. So it's if you want something that's going to be real time stock market stuff with 60,000 stocks apparently, you could try that one as another game. So there's something there that you could, if you wanted to teach your children a bit about investing or spark an interest, there's something there that you could use. So that is it, Andy, for this week. We are done and dusted. I think we've covered a hell of a lot. So on to next week. Don't forget, we're not here next week, are we? So do subscribe. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time.
Good stuff, Damien. Enjoyed it as ever. Looking forward to episode 98 in a couple of weeks' time.
Good, Andy. Right, anyway, Andy, we got to go. Right, okay, until next time in episode 98. See you later.
See you later.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.